The gavel came down like a crack of thunder, its echo swallowed by the wood-paneled walls of the HOA boardroom. The president, a woman with a helmet of steel-gray hair and eyes the color of a winter sky, allowed herself a thin, bloodless smile. The motion carries. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. The eviction notice slid across the polished mahogany table, a single sheet of paper that held the weight of a tombstone. It was the smell that hit him first. The cloying, expensive perfume she always wore. Something like gardenias left to rot in the sun, mixed with the faint, acrid scent of toner from the Xerox machine that had just spat out our death sentence. My wife's hand found mine under the table, her fingers ice-cold, trembling. I could feel the old, familiar heat beginning to simmer in my veins, the kind I hadn't felt since a dusty road outside Fallujah, where choices were simple and consequences immediate. But that came later. This story doesn't start with a gavel. It starts with roses. 3 months earlier, the scent hanging in the humid North Carolina air was one of rich earth, and the first blooms of my wife's prized heirloom roses. Sarah had spent 2 years nurturing that garden back from the neglect of the previous owners. It was her therapy, her sanctuary after 15-hour shifts as an oncology nurse. The thorns had scratched her arms raw, the clay soil had stubbornly clung to her knees, but she'd persisted. Now, the Queen Elizabeth roses were a cascade of soft pink against our white picket fence, a sight that made my chest swell with a pride I hadn't felt since my last command. Our little slice of heaven was in a development called Patriots. Landing, a name that had sold me the moment I heard it. It promised order, community, a place for a retired Marine Master Sergeant and his weary healer wife to finally plant a flag and rest. The promise was a lie. The first letter arrived on thick, cream-colored stock, embossed with the HOA's eagle and laurel crest. It cited violation 42C, non-conforming flora. The roses, it stated, were not on the pre-approved list of community aesthetic vegetation. A fine of $50 was levied, with an additional $50 per day until the violation was remediated. Sarah's face fell. They can't be serious. They're roses. It's probably just a formality, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. A mistake. I'll go talk to them. The HOA office was a converted plantation-style house at the development's entrance, a building that tried too hard to look old and established. The air inside was refrigerated and smelled of lemon-scented polish and latent authority. The woman behind the vast oak desk was Evelyn Gray, the HOA president. She didn't look up from her computer screen as I entered, letting me stand there like a recruit reporting for duty. "Mrs. Gray?" I finally said. Her eyes, that pale, assessing blue, flicked up to me. She was in her late 50s, trim, dressed, in a crisp linen suit that probably cost more than my first car. Every hair was in place, every movement economical and precise. She reminded me of certain staff officers I'd known. Men who'd never seen a firefight but loved to dictate the rules of engagement from a fortified bunker. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice cool. She made my rank sound like a minor, slightly inconvenient title. "I assume this is about the violation notice." "It is. There's been a misunderstanding. Those roses are heirloom varieties." "My wife—" "The approved list is quite clear, Master Sergeant," she interrupted, producing a laminated sheet from a drawer. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on a column of plant names. "Knockout roses, drift roses, any of these sterile, landscape-friendly varieties are perfectly acceptable. What your wife has planted are, well, they're common. They drop petals. They attract bees. They lack uniformity." I felt a muscle in my jaw twitch. "They make her happy." "This community," she said, sweeping a hand toward the window, "and the manicured lawns beyond, is built on a covenant of shared standards. Happiness is a well-maintained property value. The fine stands. Remove the roses." This was the first knowledge bomb, the one I was too green to understand. An HOA's power doesn't come from the law, but from the covenant you sign when you buy your home. It's a contract, and in the eyes of the court, your signature is everything. I'd signed away my freedom for a piece of the American dream. I left, my pride stung. We paid the fine. Sarah, her spirit bruised but unbroken, quietly moved the rose bushes to pots on our back deck, a small act of defiance that felt like a defeat. We thought that was the end of it. We were wrong. The following week, a second notice arrived. Violation 18B. Exterior storage of non-decorative items. The offending articles? Sarah's ceramic gardening pots, now visible from the street. Another fine. Then came a citation for our mailbox. A standard black colonial box from Home Depot, deemed non-compliant with the custom wrought iron ones mandated by the Architectural Committee. Another fine. Our grass, a lush southern carpet of zoysia, was judged to be 1/4 inch too long. A fine. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each cream-colored envelope in the mailbox sent a jolt of anxiety through our home. The sound of the mail truck's engine became a trigger. Sarah's sanctuary had become a source of constant low-grade dread. I started watching the street, and I began to see the pattern. A silver Lincoln Navigator, Evelyn Gray's vehicle, would slow to a crawl as it passed our house. Sometimes it would stop. I once saw her passenger, a hulking man I'd learned was her son Kyle, taking pictures of our property with a long lens. The escalation was inevitable. It came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my workshop, the scent of sawdust and linseed oil. A comfort, rebuilding a classic rocking chair for Sarah. The doorbell rang. Not the friendly chime of a neighbor, but an insistent, prolonged buzz. I opened the door to find 2 men on my porch. The first was Kyle Gray, a younger, thicker version of his mother with a flat-top haircut and a neck that strained the collar of his polo shirt. He had the smug, entitled look of a man who'd never been told no. Beside him was another HOA enforcer, a weaselly guy named Chad, clutching a clipboard like a shield. "Afternoon," Kyle said, not bothering to hide, the sneer in his voice. "We're here for a compliance inspection." "You got a warrant?" I asked, my voice low. He barked a laugh. "Don't need one. Covenant Article 7, Section 4. The Architectural Committee and its designated agents retain the right to inspect any property for compliance at reasonable times." He took a step forward, intending to brush past me. "Now, we got a report of an unpermitted shed structure in the backyard." This was the second knowledge bomb, one I filed away for later. HOAs often write their covenants with dangerously broad language. Reasonable times and designated agents are terms they define, not you. Never let them inside without a formal appointment. I blocked the doorway with my body. "You're not stepping foot on my property." Kyle's face darkened. "You gonna stop me, old man?" That's when Sarah came to the door, her hands still covered in soil from repotting a fern. "What's going on, Tom?" Kyle's eyes lit up with a malicious glee. "Just the person we need to see. We're also here about the unsightly clutter on the back deck. Those pots have to go. Today." "They're my roses," Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. "They're a violation," Chad piped up from behind his clipboard. "Get off my porch," I said, the words leaving no room for negotiation. Kyle ignored me, leaning around to address Sarah directly. "You know, for a nurse, you're not very good at following instructions. Maybe I should have a chat with your supervisor at the hospital about that." The threat hung in the air, vile and personal. It was no longer about roses or mailboxes. It was a declaration of total war. I saw red. The heat in my veins flashed into an inferno. In that split second, the porch wasn't a porch anymore. It was a contested piece of ground. Kyle was an insurgent threatening my medic. My training, buried for years under a layer of civility, surged to the surface. My body moved on its own. I didn't throw a punch. A Marine doesn't brawl. He neutralizes. A threat. As Kyle took another step towards Sarah, I executed a perfect fluid sweep of his lead leg, combined with a sharp push to his chest. It wasn't about force. It was about physics and surprise. His feet went out from under him and he landed hard. On the welcome mat, the air rushing from his lungs in a surprised oof. Chad yelped and stumbled backward, tripping over a potted geranium and sprawling into the azalea bush. I stood over Kyle, my shadow falling across his shocked, reddening face. The smell of overturned earth from the broken geranium pot filled the air, mixing with the coppery taste of adrenaline on my tongue. Every muscle in my body was coiled, waiting for his next move. He didn't get up. He just stared, a mixture of rage and something else, fear in his eyes. "The next time you set foot on my property," I said, my voice so low it was almost a growl. "The next time you threaten my wife, you will regret it for the rest of your very long life. Are we clear?" He scrambled backward like a crab, got to his feet, and shot a look of pure venom my way. "You're done. You're finished. This isn't over." They retreated to their silver navigator, Chad still brushing dirt from his khakis. Sarah was trembling beside me, her hand on my arm. "Tom, what did you just do?" I had just handed Evelyn Gray the ammunition she needed. The real battle was about to begin. And I had no idea that the letter I would receive the next morning wouldn't be another fine. It would be a formal notice of a lien being placed on our home for outstanding violations, and a summons to a disciplinary hearing that would change everything. Where are you watching from? Comment your city right now, because if you think HOA power is bad where you are, you haven't seen anything yet. This was just the spark. The explosion is coming. The sheriff's deputy couldn't meet my eyes. The eviction notice he held trembled, slightly in his hand, a flutter of official doom against the backdrop of our quiet street. The sound of a neighbor's lawnmower choked and died, replaced by the low, ominous thrum of a news helicopter circling overhead. The media circus had arrived, summoned by a whisper campaign painting me as a violent, unstable veteran. Evelyn Gray's masterpiece was unfolding. "I'm real sorry about this, Master Sergeant," the deputy mumbled, his Adam's apple bobbing. The scent of his cheap cologne mixed with the dry, dusty odor of the paper he was forced to serve. It's a court order." I took it from him. The paper felt heavy, final. From her porch across the street, Mrs. Gable quickly drew her curtains shut. The silence on Patriot's Landing was deafening, broken only by the distant thwap, thwap, thwap of the helicopter blades, a sound that instantly transported me to another desert, another life where the enemies were clearer. But that was the present. To understand how a home can become a battlefield, you have to go back to the day after I put her son on his backside. The lien notice was the first missile. It arrived by certified mail, a cold, legalistic document stating that the HOA had placed a claim on our property for over $15,000 in accumulated fines and legal fees. My veteran's instinct, honed for spotting IEDs, recognized this for what it was: a financial weapon designed to cripple us. If we couldn't pay, and they knew the size of a retired E8's pension, they could foreclose. They could take our home for the price of some dead roses and a broken flower pot. The second missile was the summons to a disciplinary hearing. The charge: gross conduct unbecoming a resident and assault upon duly appointed HOA agents. Sarah read it at our kitchen table, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. The warm, comforting smell of the coffee she'd poured now seemed bitter and accusatory. "They're going to take our house, Tom. Because of me. Because of my roses." "No," I said, my voice harder than I felt. "They're not." This is where the third knowledge bomb detonates. One I learned the hard way. An HOA's fines can accrue interest and legal fees at an astronomical rate. They can snowball into a sum that bears no relation to the original violation, creating a debt that gives them the legal standing to place a lien and ultimately foreclose on your property. They weren't just bullying us. They were executing a financial siege. My counterattack began not with a roar, but with a whisper. I became a ghost in the machine of Patriot's Landing. While Sarah tried to hold her head high at the hospital, pretending the whispers behind her weren't about the crazy vet husband on the news, I went to work. My uniform had been camouflage for my body. Now I applied the same principles to my mind. I started with the HOA's own rules. I obtained the full covenant, all 287 pages of mind-numbing legalese, and I read it like it was an enemy operations manual. Because it was, late into the night, with only the blue glow of my laptop and the taste of stale coffee for company, I cross-referenced bylaws, articles, and amendments. I discovered contradictions, clauses that had expired under state law, and voting procedures that had been ignored for years. But a soldier can't fight a war alone. I needed allies. I began taking walks at dusk, the humid air thick with the smell of grilling meat and fresh-cut grass. I'd stop and talk to neighbors. Not about the weather, about them. I met Carl Jepson, a retired aerospace engineer whose satellite dish had been confiscated for being an eyesore. His hands, stained with grease from tinkering with his classic Mustang, another violation waiting to happen, shook with anger as he described the $200 a day fine. I met Maria and Luis Garcia, a young couple whose toddler's brightly colored plastic playset had been deemed non-conforming. They showed me the photo they'd been sent, a telephoto lens shot taken from the street, with a red circle drawn around the innocent little slide. The fear in their eyes wasn't about a fine. It was about being forced to choose between their child's happiness and their home. The stories were a montage of petty tyranny. Monday, a fine for a faded American flag. Tuesday, a threat over a Halloween decoration left up one day too long. Wednesday, the mysterious poisoning of Old Man Henderson's prize-winning tomato plants after he complained about the landscaping bill. We were all living in a gilded prison, and Evelyn Gray was the warden. My kitchen table became our war room. Spread across it were maps of the development, printed covenants with passages highlighted in yellow, and a timeline of Evelyn's reign. Carl, with his engineer's mind, found a gold mine. A state statute that limited how much an HOA could fine a homeowner without a formal hearing. A hearing we could prove we'd never been granted. This was our fourth knowledge bomb, a tactical nuke. Most state laws have explicit limits on HOA fine structures and require due process. They often break their own state's laws, banking on homeowner ignorance. We had them. We had the evidence of systematic bullying, of financial strong-arming, of illegal fines. We drafted a formal letter of grievance, citing the specific laws and covenant clauses they had violated. We had 6 families sign it. We were going to present it at the disciplinary hearing, turning their own stage against them. The night before the hearing, I thought we had a chance. I was wrong. The hearing was held in the same wood-paneled boardroom where this story began. The air was thick with Evelyn's gardenia perfume and the smug satisfaction of the board members flanking her. Kyle sat in the corner, arms crossed, a bruise on his jaw he'd clearly cultivated for effect. News cameras were barred, but a court reporter sat ready to transcribe. I stood to present our case. I laid out the illegal fines, the contradictory bylaws, the harassment. I introduced Carl, who spoke with crisp, technical precision. I introduced Maria Garcia, whose voice broke as she described her son crying for his slide. Evelyn listened, her face a mask of polite boredom. When I finished, she didn't address a single point. She simply smiled. A compelling narrative. Master Sergeant, truly. But it seems there's a more pressing issue than playground equipment. She lifted a remote and clicked it. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed security footage from the hospital. Sarah, in her scrubs, looking exhausted. She was in a medicine room, alone. The footage was grainy, black and white. We watched her prepare a syringe, then pause. She rubbed her eyes, her shoulders slumping. Then she did something I'd seen her do 100 times. She uncapped the syringe, lifted it, and pressed the plunger slightly, ejecting a single tiny drop of fluid into the air to clear any bubbles. A standard, safety-minded practice. The video stopped. The room was silent. Evelyn let the silence hang. This footage was anonymously provided to the hospital's oversight board. It appears to show a nurse, your wife, Master Sergeant, diverting narcotics. The air left my lungs. It was a lie. A monstrous, expertly framed lie. The angle made a routine safety check look like something illicit. The investigation is ongoing, Evelyn continued, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. Such a tragedy. A dedicated nurse, perhaps overcome by the stress of her home life. She let the implication hang in the air, a poisonous cloud. Her home life, with her violent husband. This was the midpoint twist. This was their surprise leverage. They weren't just attacking our property. They were launching a surgical strike on Sarah's character, her career, her very soul. They had forced me to choose, stand and fight for my house, or save my wife. Sarah's hand found mine. It was cold, but it wasn't trembling anymore. It was still. The stillness of absolute shock. The look on her face, a mixture of betrayal, horror, and utter devastation, will haunt me forever. Evelyn leaned forward, her victory assured. Given this development concerning Mrs. Riggs's professional conduct, which undoubtedly contributes to the unstable environment here, the board moves to expedite the foreclosure process. We will be seeking immediate possession. The gavel cracked down. We had lost. We were not just losing our home. We were being annihilated. I led Sarah out of that room, her body moving on autopilot. The reporters shouted questions, their camera flashes popping like muzzle flares. We drove home in a silence more terrible than any explosion. That should have been the end. It should have broken us. But as I watched Sarah stare blankly out the kitchen window at her potted roses, something in me, something deeper than anger, colder than fear, finally clicked into place. They had made a fatal mistake. They had attacked my medic. I walked to my workshop, the smell of sawdust and oil now smelling like a familiar arsenal. I opened a footlocker I hadn't touched in years. Beneath old uniforms and folded flags, my fingers found cold, hard metal. I laid my service pistol on the bench. Then I reached for the real weapon, a burn phone I'd kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number for a man who owed me his life a dozen times over. A man who now worked in a very specific, very dark corner of the intelligence community. "Gunny?" His voice came on, sharp and alert. "Everything all right?" "Negative," I said, my voice low and flat. "I need a deep dive. A woman named Evelyn Gray, HOA president, Patriots Landing, North Carolina. I need everything. Financials, property records, business affiliations, and her son, Kyle. I want to know what he's been doing since his dishonorable discharge." There was a pause on the other end. Then, the sound of a keyboard clicking. "Give me 24 hours. I hung up. The war was no longer about covenants and fines. It was about survival. And for the first time, I was fighting on my terms. What they did next, the sheer depth of their corruption, would have destroyed anyone else. But it gave me the one thing I needed to win: the target. Ever wonder how far an HOA will go to protect its secrets? The next 24 hours would blow the roof off the whole damn town. The gavel came down like a crack of thunder, its echo swallowed by the wood-paneled walls of the HOA boardroom. The president, a woman with a helmet of steel-gray hair and eyes the color of a winter sky, allowed herself a thin, bloodless smile. "The motion carries. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." The eviction notice slid across the polished mahogany table. It was the smell that hit me first. The cloying, expensive perfume she always wore. Something like gardenias left to rot in the sun, mixed with the faint, acrid scent of toner from the Xerox machine that had just spat out our death sentence. My wife's hand found mine under the table, her fingers ice-cold, trembling. I could feel the old, familiar heat beginning to simmer in my veins, the kind I hadn't felt since a dusty road outside Fallujah. But that heat wasn't for fighting. Not anymore. It was for burning their entire corrupt empire to the ground. Didn't shove the paper back. I didn't stand up and yell. I simply looked at Evelyn Gray, and for the first time I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who has just seen the enemy's battle plan and found the fatal flaw. 72 hours, I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. "That's longer than I thought you'd last." The smile on her face faltered. The board members shifted in their leather chairs. The air, once thick with her triumph, now grew thin and sharp with uncertainty. "This hearing is adjourned," Evelyn said, reaching for her gavel again. "No," I said, the single word cutting through the room like a knife. "It's not. You see, you made one mistake. Actually, you made several. But the big one was going after my wife's license." I reached into the battered leather satchel at my feet. The sound of the zephyr was loud in the silent room. "You tried to destroy a woman who spends her days saving lives because she dared to plant a rose bush. You didn't just pick a fight. You declared war on the wrong family." I pulled out a stack of folders, thick and heavy, and dropped them on the table with a thud that made the water glasses tremble. This was it. The culmination of 48 hours of hell, of a sleepless night on a burn phone with a ghost from my past, of cross-referencing property records until my eyes burned. The fifth and final knowledge bomb, the one that would detonate their entire world. An HOA board member, particularly the president, has a fiduciary duty to the community. Self-dealing, using their position for personal financial gain, is not just a covenant violation. It's felony fraud. And Evelyn Gray wasn't just skimming from the coffers. She was building a monopoly. Let's start with the landscaping, I began, my voice flat, tactical. I opened the first folder. The HOA pays Carolina Premium Landscaping a cool $60,000 a year for community upkeep. A company owned by a silent partner. Your brother, Robert. I slapped a corporate ownership document on the table. The same brother who, county records show, bought the vacant lot on Elm Street for a song from the HOA's Land Asset Fund. A fund you control, and then sold it to a developer for 10 times the price. The kickback landed in an LLC you control, the Gray Family Trust. Evelyn's face was pale. These are outrageous lies. You have no proof. I have bank statements, I said calmly, fanning them out. Wire transfers from the developer to the LLC, from the LLC to your personal account. It's all here. But that's just the appetizer. I opened the second folder. The mandatory mailbox replacement program last year. Every homeowner had to buy a new, approved wrought iron box from Heritage Mailboxes for $250 a pop. A company owned by your son, Kyle. Kyle, who had been smirking in the corner, suddenly looked like he'd been gut-punched. The thing about Kyle's business, I continued, is that it doesn't have a workshop. It has a P.O. box. And the mailboxes? They're shipped directly from a foundry in China that sells them for $19 each. You used your power to force your neighbors to pay a 1,200% markup to line your son's pockets. That's not just unethical. That's mail fraud. A federal offense. The room was dead silent now. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the frantic scratching of the court reporter's pen. I could smell the sweat beginning to break out on Kyle's brow, a sour, anxious odor. But the piece de resistance, I said, opening the final folder. The thing that really takes the cake is the security fee. The monthly $50 charge every homeowner pays for patrol services provided by Sentinel Security. A company, according to the Secretary of State, owned by your other son, Brandon. I looked directly at the hulking man now shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The same Brandon who has a restraining order from his ex-wife for domestic violence. The same Brandon whose security guards are just his buddies from the gym, who don't have security licenses, and who spend most of their shift sleeping, in their car, or as these time-stamped photos show, using their master key to break into homes during the day for petty theft. I threw the photos down, blurry, but clear enough. Brandon's security guy, caught on a nanny cam we'd installed after Maria Garcia's jewelry went missing, walking out of her bedroom with her jewelry box. The gasp from the room was collective. This was no longer about fines. This was about crime. You built a kingdom, Evelyn, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that forced everyone to lean in to hear. You used fear and petty rules to keep everyone in line while you and your family looted this community. Blind. You turned a homeowners association into a criminal enterprise. Evelyn Gray's composure finally shattered. This is a witch hunt. This veteran is clearly unstable. He's threatening us. I demand you remove him. But no. One moved. The other board members were staring at her like they'd never seen her before. The spell was broken. That's when the door to the boardroom opened. It wasn't a sheriff's deputy. It was two men in dark suits, their faces grim. They flashed badges at the court reporter. Evelyn Gray? Kyle Gray? Brandon Gray? The lead agent said, his voice devoid of all emotion. FBI, we'd like you to come with us. You're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. The sound of the gavel hitting the floor was a small, pathetic noise. Evelyn Gray's hands were being cuffed behind her back, the metal clicks echoing in the stunned silence. The winter in her eyes had melted into pure, unadulterated terror. As they led her away, her gaze locked with mine. There was no victory in it for me, only the cold satisfaction of a threat neutralized. The fallout was swift and absolute. The liens against our home and against the homes of every family who had stood with us were voided. The fines were erased. The state attorney general launched a full investigation into HOAs across the region. Evelyn, Kyle, and Brandon cut deals implicating others in a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Patriot's Landing. They would all serve time. On a bright Sunday morning a month later, a community meeting was held. A real one, without a gavel. We voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA. The sound that filled the clubhouse wasn't one of angry debate, but of relieved laughter and the clinking of beer bottles. I stood on my porch that evening, Sarah beside me. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air smelled of rain-washed earth and, faintly, of roses. Sarah had replanted her heirlooms in the front yard that morning. No one would ever tell her she couldn't again. Down the street, a kid's bicycle lay on a lawn. A brightly colored playset stood proudly in a backyard. An American flag, slightly faded, fluttered from a porch. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was free. Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. "We won, Tom." I looked out at the messy, beautiful, free street. I thought of the battles, the lies, the fear they'd tried to use as a weapon. I thought of the quiet strength of my wife, a healer who had almost been broken by a woman obsessed with power. "No," I said, putting my arm around her. "We just took our home back. The system is built on the assumption that you'll comply, that you'll be too afraid, too tired, too poor to fight back. They bank on your ignorance. But knowledge is a weapon. Your signature on a covenant is a contract, but it is not a surrender of your rights. Remember that. Your home is your castle. Never let anyone, especially someone with a gavel and a god complex, tell you otherwise. If you believe no one is above the law, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. Your story could be next. Comment your HOA horror below, and I might cover it. Like, share, and tag a friend who needs to hear this. The more people know, the harder it is for the corrupt to hide. This isn't just my fight, it's yours too. Now, let's go take down the next one.